Okay, so you're here because you want to like really get to the bottom of things, right? Like cut through all the noise and really understand what's going on with some of these complicated topics.
Exactly. We're all about getting to the core of it. No fluff.
Right to the point. And today we are going deep on something that is so crucial for anyone who's ever picked up a golf club.
I think this is going to resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, we're talking about sway. And
Yeah.
specifically, we're going to break down how your pelvis and your chest move during the swing.
Yeah. And more importantly, how they work together.
Yes,
Yeah.
how those movements kind of relate to each other.
Because it's not just about one or the other. It's about the relationship between the two.
Exactly. And we're not just basing this on, feel or opinion. We're really digging into some hard data here. We're looking at insights from Henrik Jentsch, who's the director of Golf Academy 360 Degrees, powered by Sportsbox.
Yeah, he's been doing a lot of work on how to best coach sway using motion capture technology. Really, really interesting stuff. Think of it like having sensors on the body that track every little movement.
So we're getting like super precise data here.
Way beyond what the naked eye can see.
So our mission today is to give you a really clear understanding of what pelvis and chest sway actually are.
Yes, and how they work together.
Or sometimes don't.
Right, exactly. Sometimes they're working against each other, and you don't want that during the swing, and then why this matters so much for actually hitting the ball solid.
Yeah, why this isn't just some abstract concept. This really impacts your game. So let's break this down.
Yeah, let's get into it.
When a coach is starting to look at sway using this kind of technology, like where do they even begin?
Well, the first step often involves looking at pelvis sway and chest sway as separate entities.
Okay.
So the technology allows us to track the movement of each independently throughout the swing.
So it's like getting a separate report card for your hips and your upper body.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that individual analysis gives you a baseline understanding of what each part of the body is doing. So, for example, Henrik shared data from one golfer where at the very top of the swing, their pelvis had swayed back 0.8 inches and their chest by 1.1 inches.
Okay.
And he actually pointed out that those were good positions.
So that's interesting. So it's not just like if you're swaying too much, it's also about the direction and the amount.
Really, nuances of it.
It's all about those little details.
Okay.
Now, as the swing transitions from the backswing to the downswing, does that relationship between the chest and pelvis stay consistent?
That is a great question, and it's a crucial point because we often see significant changes during that transition.
Oh, really?
As the golfer starts their downswing, the way that the chest and the pelvis sway in relation to each other evolves. So in the example that we're looking at the point where the club is swung halfway down, so it's parallel to the ground, the golfer's chest was actually ahead of their pelvis in terms of sway.
Okay.
So the chest had moved 3.6 inches toward the target, while the pelvis was at 3.2 inches.
And is that a problem at that point in the swing?
That's a potential red flag. Ideally, the chest shouldn't be significantly ahead of the pelvis at that stage.
Okay.
And there's a good reason for that. When the chest moves too far ahead of the pelvis early in the downswing, it often leads to what we call an over-the-top motion.
Got it.
So think about it this way. The upper body starts to rotate too quickly, and that causes the club to come from outside the target line.
Makes sense.
And that disrupts the coordinated sequence of movements, the chain reaction that's essential for power and accuracy.
So it's like you're throwing off the timing of the whole swing.
Exactly. You get out of sync.
Okay, so we've got a snapshot at the top and then another halfway down. Now, what about at the moment of truth impact?
Yeah, what happens there?
What does sway typically look like at impact, and what were the numbers in this particular example?
So at impact, the focus is primarily on the movement towards the target.
Okay.
And in this case, the golfer's pelvis had swayed 3.8 inches toward the target, and the chest had moved 3.6 inches in the same direction.
So both moving forward.
Both moving forward, which is good. But the key insight here is that the chest movement was considered a little bit out of the range of what's generally preferred, which is somewhere between 0 and 2 inches of targetward sway.
Oh, so even though both the hips and the upper body are moving in the right direction, the amount of movement in the chest is still a crucial factor.
Precisely. Because too much chest sway towards the target at impact can cause a few problems.
Like what?
Well, it can lead to a breakdown in your posture,
Okay.
sometimes referred to as early extension.
Yeah.
You stand up out of your swing.
Right.
More practically, as Henrik pointed out, it can cause the lowest point of your swing arc to be too far ahead of the ball.
And that's not good.
Not good. So this can result in thin shots where you're catching the top of the ball or a lower ball flight than you intended.
So you're not making solid contact.
Exactly. You're losing power and control.
Okay, so we've looked at these individual movements of the pelvis and chest at different stages, but now the source material introduces this really interesting concept of a sway gap.
Yes, the sway gap.
Yeah.
This is really getting into the nitty-gritty.
So what exactly is that, and why is it so important for understanding the swing?
The sway gap is basically the measurement of the difference in sway between the pelvis and the chest at any given point in the swing. So after analyzing those individual sway numbers, coaches will often look at this gap to really understand the overall pattern of movement
Okay.
and how those two key body segments are coordinating or sometimes not coordinating with each other.
So it's not just about what each is doing on its own, but how they're positioned relative to each other throughout the entire swing.
Precisely. It's about that relationship.
Got it.
So for instance, at the address position in our example, the sway gap was Maganda's 2.2 inches.
Okay.
And what that negative number tells us is that the chest was starting 2.2 inches behind the pelvis. Now, the preferred range at address is typically between negative 1.6 and 0.4 inches, ideally closer to 0.
So basically you want them stacked.
Pretty much, yeah. You want that nice alignment. And so this golfer was starting with their chest quite a bit behind their pelvis.
Interesting. And this sway gap isn't a static number, right? It's changing as the swing unfolds.
Absolutely. It's dynamic. It's constantly evolving throughout the entire motion from setup to follow-through.
Okay.
And in the example we're discussing, the data showed that the golfer maintained a sway gap outside that preferred range through various points in the backswing.
So at halfway back, halfway back even at the top of the swing.
Right. However, the analysis also revealed that the golfer did a better job of recovering in the downswing. They reached a more favorable sway gap at impact, although it was still slightly on the lower side.
Meaning?
Meaning the chest was still a little bit more over the pelvis than ideally desired.
So even with some improvement as they came into impact, that initial positioning with the sway gap kind of had a lingering influence.
It's all connected.
It's all connected.
It really highlights how interconnected all these different elements of the golf swing are.
So what's the ultimate aim of analyzing all this data on individual sway and the sway gap?
Good question. The goal is to help golfers develop a better awareness of what they need to feel in their body to optimize their sway and their sway gap throughout the swing.
So it's not just about seeing the numbers, it's about translating those numbers into a feeling.
Exactly. By understanding these movements and their relationship, golfers can develop a more consistent and efficient way of contacting the golf ball.
So we've gone from looking at individual movements to understanding this concept of the sway gap and how it all ties together.
And how it ultimately impacts your ability to hit the ball well.
So for you, the listener out there, think about this. How might actively focusing on the feeling of how your pelvis and chest are moving in relation to each other rather than solely on where your ball ends up unlock a new level of consistency and power in your own golf game?
It's a great question to ponder.
It really is. It's all about tuning into what your body is doing, not just the result you're seeing.
Absolutely. Pay attention to those subtle sensations, and you might be surprised at what you discover.
Food for thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Always a pleasure. Until next time.
Keep swinging.
And swing.
Yeah.
But in the right way.
Exactly.
With control.
See ya.
See you later.